What's up, everybody? It's Vin Diesel here. We're going to be tying up a popper head using some sliced foam. If you don't know how to make your sliced foam, I'm going to post a video right here that will show you how to do it, so just click on the link. But for those that are already prepared, we got a TP 615. This is an AREX hook in the vise, and we're going to be getting started. You want to use a little bit of a heavier thread. This is a wax thread by Symmetrical in a 8/0. I've used it and I really like it for doing these particular foam popper heads. And you just want to start with a generous even spacing thread down the shank almost to the point. Now you kind of got to do a little bit of math here because as you know, we sliced our foam already and it's about 1/8 of an inch. And so I kind of have to space it out and see. I'm going to get about 4 sections here. Sometimes if I do a little bit of a thinner foam, I can do 5. On a smaller hook though, I'm going to be doing about 4. And so what I do is I kind of zigzag over, trying to do my wraps over the foam perpendicular, and then I always do one wrap after. And you can see how it kind of V's it onto the shank of the hook. And then I'll do the same on the other side, on the bottom side of the shank. So try to keep that wrap going parallel, even with the shank of the hook. I do a wrap and then go back over, using my finger to really hold that thread in place. You can see how I'm kind of pinching it down. Your fingers are going to be your friends here. This is not the easiest thing to do, and I'm no expert, but I try and I attempt new things and thought I'd share it. So now we're going to basically be splitting the top and the bottom, tying one in on the side, keeping that wrap parallel to the shank of the hook, do a wrap on each side, and then as you come down on the other side, I'm not necessarily tightening this to the point that I have to worry about cutting the foam at this point, because the way that I do these is I keep inserting foam into the gaps. As you can see here, I'm now inserting one on the other side. Nope, that one got away from me. Now you just want to insert it, kind of hold it in place the best you can, and then bring your wrap over, go parallel the shank, and then back over the other side. And if you don't get those wraps right on top of each other, that's okay, but you want to try and do that. But as I was saying earlier, I'm not really tightening these wraps at this point. But now as I start to spread it and there's a little bit of a foam gap where you can see the shank, now at this point I'm going to kind of come down and tighten that just a little bit. So I'm using this foam, kind of wedging it in there to the shank as the way of tightening those first thread wraps. That way I kind of know where I'm going, where I need space. It's worked out really well, and it allows me to get these the first 4 are easy to get on the shank, but the second 4 are a little bit more difficult if you tied it too tight. You can't really get them into the core of the shank because your wraps were too tight initially. But by doing them just a little bit looser in the beginning, I'm able to now get all of these V's, the point of the foam we're tying in where our thread's going over the foam, that's able to almost get into the shank on almost every one. So that way it's central to the core. It'd be a similar methodology between tying your deer hair. When you shave it off, you don't want your deer hair sticking 1/8 of an inch off the shank, because then you'll cut your thread. And so we're shoving these wraps all the way into the foam, and this is spring barring. The first one's always the most difficult in my opinion, because once you get this first one done and it's standing perpendicular to the hook shank, then we're golden, because the next one kind of rests up against it. Now if you notice you've got a gap, you can go ahead and tie more in. You do want to make sure it's not too tight, but tight enough that we're not going to have that looks pretty good, but let's add one more right here. As we get up more towards the front of the hook, and we're adding I'm going to be adding some colors in here to show how you can do different variation. But as you start doing that, you kind of have to start paying attention to how many pieces you're tying in. This first one, since it's all white, not a big deal. As you start to add the colors, it can become a big deal, and you kind of got to worry about how many you're putting in, how many you're going to be adding or subtracting of the colors. But we'll go ahead and start this next section now. And the key is to just start on the top of the shank and do that first wrap so that it's parallel with the shank, and then use your finger to kind of make sure that thread goes down almost on top of your other thread wrap if possible. and then we'll go to the bottom. Now we're going to start adding a little bit of color on this next section here, and I'm going to go with a light green, and then I will have it start with the light green and kind of have that V out, and then start with a darker green in the middle. Usually when I'm tying up these poppers and mimicking a frog especially, I have a white belly or a yellow or sometimes a light green, but we're just going to we're having a little bit of fun here doing a little bit of opposite, and so I hope you have fun with these too. And so it doesn't really go to match a particular frog pattern, but as you can see, you want to start on the bottom, or sorry, your first one you want to be on the top, and then you want to go on the bottom where the hook point is. And just as we did before, we're going to start on the sides, and we're not doing super tight wraps again. Those tight wraps could potentially cut this foam, and so you want to just make sure that these are almost laying over tension. You know, nothing, we're not tugging or pulling on it, we're just laying it down over that foam and then doing a wrap around the shank just to secure everything in place. If you have one that's kind of at an angle, a thread wrap like that, just try and match it the best you can and then kind of pull it towards you, and that helps to seat it properly. But now we're going to start thinking colors. I want to have about add about 3 strips of green, and so I'm going to start with the bottom center one and then put another green strip right there into the side. And now we are going to start pulling down on this as I pinch those 2 pieces of foam together. That way it kind of slides it in, and that is how we secure this and keep a nice tight head. And we're going to go ahead and do that to the other side now. And so just kind of split the gap, do a wrap over parallel the best we can to the shank, working our way through all this mess. And it's, you know, sometimes the cleaner you can get it, the better, as you're working your way zigzagging through there. It helps, but you know, it's not inevitable that you could snag up on a piece of foam. I do it, and I'm not perfect at these, like I've mentioned, but I sure do have fun tying these. So now we're going to start stacking in the white. We have our highlight of green started on the bottom, so we're going to start going parallel, bring it up and over with a wrap, and then back over and do a securing wrap in front of it. And as we're doing that, of course, pinch it, pull it tight, and we'll work our way now over to the other side. And you know, this is looking pretty good. We just got to start counting here. So I've got 3 light green at this point, and I think I'm at 5 white on the top. And so then, you know, maybe 6 we'll progress and eventually have, you know, about equal white to the color as we get up closer to the eye of the hook. And so now that that's secure, I'm not going to bore you with doing that same process over and over again. So I'm going to fast forward through this. And another key thing I forgot to mention is, as we are adding these and starting new sections, something I like to do is just take a super glue on a brush and just dab it around that circle around the shank, and that way we can make sure it's solid. It's not going to walk around the hook shank, but make sure you let that super glue dry before you start tying in your foam, otherwise it could get super messy. But same process for all this. We're adding the darker green now. I'm just going to add 1 darker green, and then I'll put the lighter green on each side, and then when we get up to the last section, I'll add probably 3 dark green and then, you know, a couple light green, and we'll really have to add some more white to make that a nice head on the front that will push a lot of water. And so same process, tie in on the bottom of the shank, or on the top of the shank first with your white, and then your first color, your main bottom color, on the hook point side of the bottom of the shank of the hook, and then work your way on the sides. That way you know your colors are aligned, you know that you're going to be, you know, on point, and you know you can always add white, more white on top to kind of push those together. Whereas, you know, you could actually kind of twist the colors if you start adding too many on each side, because whenever you add a green to one side, you got to add another green to the other. And so if you find that it's not dense enough, use the white to kind of thicken it up on the top to kind of push everything around, and it will. Just find that gap where it's the best, or where you've got the most split, to get that foam down to the hook shank, and then that's where I would add one. But we're going to go ahead and finish this off now on the front. I'm using a little bit of glue again, and then we're going to start with the white on the top,
Then we'll tie in our color on the bottom, and same process. Just make sure you're trying your best at this point not to wrap too tight with these first several you tie in, because these are the ones you got to have be a little bit movable. Otherwise, I don't know. I've never really had a problem of cutting foam, but I'm also not using like a super thin thread. I'm usually using 8/0, 6/0. I tried using like a heavy thread, like a 3/0 GSP, but I found that it was just creating too much thread bulk. And so I've really stuck with this 8/0 and been really satisfied, especially this wax thread. It seems to really kind of grip that foam. It doesn't tear through it, and just has been pretty durable and holds up to some fish bites pretty well. So just continue to add the colors. Like I said, I'm adding 2 more extra dark green to kind of make a little bit more of a fun pattern on the belly, and then we'll continue to pump in some more white to spread that and make it a nice tight head, because this is what, as you strip, is going to be going against the water. And I've gone as extreme as to taper this foam so that as you tie it in, it's kind of sticking more forward on the front to kind of help create a popper. But if I'm doing that, I might as well just buy one of those popper heads that already has that. It would save me time, and that way we can just have fun fishing and whip out more of these to go fish. But last step is do a nice 3-turn whip finish, and I'll probably make sure you get them in around that hook eye, and we'll check this out. I'm going to do a double whip finish just for security, and we're going to be applying a little bit of resin to this later, probably when we tie the fly. That way it just is a solid front head. But check that out. So you can see we've got our colors. We've got plenty of foam here. This thing should float for days. It's pretty dense. It doesn't look dense right now, but as we trim this to the hook size, it's going to be pretty awesome. I might have been able to split my foam now into thirds, but let's go ahead and start shaving this. I'm going to put it back in the vise here, and we will get some scissors out. These are just some older scissors I've had. You don't need to use your nice new ones, but here's basically the shape we're going to go for, is kind of a taper down. So we're going to start higher than we probably will end up. We'll probably end up trimming this top part again, but I'm basically going to box this out, but not necessarily making a square rectangle box, but cut the top first so that we know our angle and we can kind of see where we're at. And not all of our confetti, this stripped foam was equal in length when we tied it in. I guess you could have spent more time doing that, but now I'll trim the bottom to create that. I got to see, okay, there's my hook point. I'm going to go a little higher than I would think it needs to be, just so I can see what I'm working with. So just like with deer hair, trim, leave more on at this point, because you can always trim more later, but it's harder to add more. And now we'll box the sides. I'm going to start wide, kind of to match our top, and then I'll taper it back towards the eye. So you can see that nice angle there, and we'll do the same to the other side, just kind of match it, working our way, tapering it. And right there we got our rough cut. You can see right now we don't have any hook gap, so I'm going to trim this up, and I'm going to fast forward through this again just because I spend way too much time trimming and I don't want to have you suffer through it as well. So you just kind of trim it, small incremental trims. The more you cut it and not pushing down, the more you're going to kind of have split foam. The fish don't care, but you may not get as many likes on Instagram. So just continue to trim it. I always work the sides and the corners last, and I kind of want the bottom to be flat, and then I'll do a slight round on the bottom and then kind of a bigger rounded corners on the top. It's not going to lay perfectly flat as is. It should keel pretty good with the hook point and the weight of this, but I'm going to put some rubber arms on the sides, frog arms basically, which will help to stabilize it side to side. And you can trim as much as you want. Just make sure you're using some decently sharp scissors. The more you trim, the more likely you are to go too far, and that defeats the whole purpose of having a lot of foam. So bam, look at that. we have a nicely shaped head here. Didn't take too much time to shape that. We got some colors that are slightly off, but pretty decent for whipping through this pretty quick. There you can see the belly's flat. We got a nice rounded top. Man, that looks pretty good. So let's go ahead and we'll put it back in the vise now. We're just going to add some eyes. You don't need to add the eyes. I do it for fun sometimes. And we're going to use some of these dragon eyes by Flyman Co. I don't know if it's Surface Seducer or Dragon. I'll have to look at the package. But these are super easy to put in. I kind of cut the tip of the eye off. That way it kind of makes it look a little meaner. Gives me a little bit more confidence. And I'm going to place it kind of just right in here. Now, all I need to do is take that little piece of foam right there, one of these strips, cut it off, and that eye is going to fit in there just right. We're going to add a little bit of super glue, pretty a heavy amount, because I want to be able to work it around a little bit. I don't want it to, as the instant I set it down for it to bond. And so I'm going to take just some of this regular super glue, brush a lot in there. I'm allowing the brush to be heavily saturated at this point so that some of it also is, providing durability to the foam. And then we'll just grab this eye with our, place it on our bodkin to kind of slide it in there. And sometimes this goes really, really smooth, and other times it does not. So we'll go ahead and, yep, that one did not go smooth. So I'll just go ahead and take that off, and I'm not going to use the bodkin. I'm just going to use my finger. I found that as long as you don't have any super glue on your finger, you can place it in. And then I'll use the bodkin here to kind of seal the deal and place it in. Because at this point, if I push my finger on there, I'm going to probably get a little glue on my finger, which will also attach to the eye, and it will become a miserable experience. So, and that was kind of smooth. It looks pretty good right there. The last step is I like to put just a heavy coat of UV resin over this just to hold it in place. I let it kind of seep in for a second before I cure it, and that way we have the super glue bonding it from the back. We have the UV resin on the outside, which is also bonding to the foam, and so we shouldn't lose these eyes. Occasionally I still lose the eyes, but usually that's because it's gotten so many hits, which is what we want. So go ahead and do the same to the other side. Just cut your strip foam, get your area prepped by putting some super glue down, use your bodkin to push it in place, and then we'll just put some UV resin over the top of it and call it good. And that's pretty much how you form this foam strip popper head. The color combinations are endless just because foam's available in so much and we're making our own. So I hope you tie some up and fish them.